When you look at the raw data coming out of the defense sector this morning, the level of military readiness escalating around the United States and Iran is staggering. We are seeing a concentration of naval power and strategic assets that goes far beyond standard deterrence. You have multiple carrier strike groups operating in tandem, continuous airborne early warning patrols monitoring the airspace, and a complete reinforcement of regional missile defense systems. It is a posture that signals an anticipation of imminent large-scale engagement.
It is impossible to ignore the shift in the atmosphere. Even for people who do not follow daily geopolitical news, there is a very real, very heavy psychological weight right now. The rhetoric from Tehran is hardening, the alerts coming out of Washington are increasingly urgent, and the political discourse here at home is entirely consumed by it. It does not feel like the usual diplomatic posturing we have seen over the last 20 years. There is a palpable sense of regional instability and, frankly, a global anxiety that we are standing on the edge of a conflict that cannot be contained.
That is the defining characteristic of this exact moment. The strategic uncertainty. We are operating in an environment where the margin for error has completely evaporated. A misread signal, a localized skirmish in a contested waterway, or a preemptive strike based on faulty intelligence could instantaneously ignite a theater-wide war. And the world knows it. You can feel the psychological atmosphere of pre-conflict tension. The global economy is reacting to it, the supply chains are bracing for it, and average citizens are watching the news with a genuine sense of dread.
It truly feels like a historic turning point. Like the post-Cold War era is definitively over, and we are stepping into something entirely unpredictable and inherently chaotic. It makes you wonder about the nature of these massive, global shifts. We assume the future is just an empty canvas, right? That we are just stumbling through random, disconnected crises. But when you are in the middle of a moment like this, you have to ask, are these global crises truly random? Do historical turning points follow specific patterns that we just fail to recognize until we are looking backward?
That existential questioning is exactly where we need to focus today, because throughout history, whenever we reach these periods of extreme global strain, we find that such times have often been foreseen. There are prophetic traditions and specific individuals who maintain that the narrative of human history has already been sketched out, at least in its broad structural outlines. They suggest that our existence, especially during times of massive geopolitical upheaval, involves traversing through predetermined events that were described long ago.
So, the idea that the future isn't a chaotic series of accidents, but rather something with an underlying architecture, that is a difficult concept for the modern, rational mind to accept. We like to believe we are in complete control of the steering wheel. But what kind of prophetic traditions are you talking about in relation to the specific tension we are feeling right now?
I want to focus on a specific individual who held the absolute conviction that beyond the temporal veil, specific historical patterns were coalescing. She did not view global crises as arbitrary occurrences, but rather as synchronized movements. She compared it to a clock's internal mechanisms turning long before the actual chime is heard. Her name was Jeane Dixon. And even decades following her passing, her declarations continue to circulate in intelligence and geopolitical circles because people perceive a very direct resonance in contemporary happenings.
Jeane Dixon. I have heard the name. But I think for a lot of people, the immediate association might be tabloid predictions or generalized psychic claims. How does someone like that connect to the severe, grounded reality of a potential war in the Middle East or a shifting global power dynamic?
It is a fair question, and it requires separating the media caricature from the historical reality of her influence. Dixon was not perceived by her serious adherents as a mere prognosticator or an amusement park clairvoyant making innocuous guesses. During her lifetime, she provided counsel to incredibly influential personalities. She was sought out by powerful political figures, diplomats, and leaders who were intrigued, skeptical, and occasionally deeply unsettled by her pronouncements. She possessed an unusual ability to foresee significant political shifts and international developments with a level of specificity that defied mere probability.
So she was operating in rooms where actual policy and power were being discussed. That changes the context significantly. It is not just someone reading tea leaves. It is someone analyzing the trajectory of human behavior and power structures. What did she actually say about the time we are living in right now?
What disquiets many researchers is not what she disclosed about the Cold War or the 20th century, but rather her assertions concerning our current epoch. She depicted an era characterized precisely by what we are witnessing: worldwide strain, rapid and uncontrollable technological advancement, profound societal fragmentation, and a juncture where humanity would experience an unprecedented blend of interconnectedness and deep division. She spoke of apprehension, devastation, unpredictability, and also a necessary enlightenment. Furthermore, according to those who have meticulously analyzed her writings, she believed the mid-2020s, the exact window we are in right now, would represent the ultimate pivotal moment.
The mid-2020s, which aligns perfectly with the current escalation of global political tensions, the debates concerning borders and immigration that are driving public discourse, and rival global powers meticulously monitoring one another. She firmly held that there were no coincidences, only indicators that humankind fails to discern until after the opportune moment has passed. So, what are the specific indicators she left for us? If we are currently living inside this synchronized clockwork, what are the gears we should be looking at?
There are 5 major prophecies frequently linked to her predictions about this specific period. Whether one interprets these as symbolic allegories, psychological projections, or genuine prescience, they build upon one another to form a comprehensive image of global transition. The initial prophecy is frequently referred to as the lion and the bear.
The lion and the bear. In geopolitical symbolism, those animals are heavily loaded. The bear is almost universally recognized as the representation of Russia, or at least a formidable Eastern power. Who is the lion in this context?
Dixon spoke of an American leader, or the American apparatus itself, symbolically represented as a lion. She described a figure or a national posture destined to ascend to power through assertive rhetoric, pledges of domestic restoration, and a core message emphasizing national might. She indicated that this lion would exhibit a boisterous, self-assured, and dominant presence in public address. It would project an image of absolute, uncompromising strength to the domestic audience and the world at large.
That sounds incredibly familiar to the current style of American political leadership and the broader nationalistic tone we are seeing in the United States. A heavy reliance on projecting strength, utilizing aggressive diplomatic language, and constantly reassuring the public of American supremacy. But where does the bear come in?
Here is where the prophecy becomes highly specific to our current crisis. She stated that while the lion would vociferously challenge numerous smaller opponents, it would demonstrate an unexpected, almost uncharacteristic degree of prudence and hesitation toward a formidable Eastern adversary, epitomized by the bear. The lion roars at the world, but treads very carefully around the bear. Many contemporary analysts connect this exact symbolism to the complex, deeply strained dynamics between the United States and Russia, and by extension, its strategic partners in the East.
That is a fascinating psychological read on global politics. What makes that prediction compelling is the nuance. It isn't a prediction of a massive, bloody war between the two superpowers. It is a prediction of hesitation. The lion projects strength but avoids direct kinetic confrontation with the bear. We are seeing that exact dynamic play out in Eastern Europe and the Middle East right now. There are proxy conflicts, there are sanctions, but there is a distinct, mutual avoidance of direct, catastrophic engagement.
Precisely, those who follow her writings closely contend that the prophecy portrays a psychological equilibrium of power rather than a purely military one. If you consider contemporary geopolitics, influence seldom rests solely on the number of aircraft carriers or nuclear warheads a nation possesses anymore. Information warfare, economic leverage, control over supply chains, strategic alliances, and diplomatic advantage now hold comparable, if not superior, significance. The true contest between these major powers is not being waged on traditional battlefields.
It is being waged in the realms of negotiation, public perception, and concealed information. Economic sanctions are the new blockades. Cyber attacks are the new artillery. She is describing a paradigm shift in how empires compete.
And she maintained that the decisions made during this specific interval, this standoff between the assertive lion and the patient bear, would determine long-term global sway. Not immediately. You won't see a surrender document signed on a battleship. But historically, years in the future, the ramifications of this current hesitation and strategic maneuvering will become unmistakable. The true import resides not in the specific identity of the lion, but in what the lion symbolizes. Confidence on the surface, tempered with profound underlying vulnerability.
A nation projecting outward strength because it feels inwardly apprehensive about its declining influence, its global standing, and its ability to control the narrative. That is the United States in the mid-2020s. We have the largest military budget in human history, yet there is a pervasive domestic anxiety that we are losing our grip on the global order. And the bear, by contrast, embodies patience.
Exactly. The bear does not seek immediate, explosive confrontation. It utilizes a strategy of waiting, observing, and leveraging opportune timing as its primary strategic advantage. Dixon cautioned that a moment would arrive when the lion would confront a pivotal, defining choice. Initiate a direct confrontation that risks total global instability, or accept a compromise that risks a massive loss of prestige and historical dominance. She believed this specific decision, playing out in the diplomatic exchanges and trade negotiations of our current decade, would shape the future more profoundly than any bomb ever dropped.
It is a terrifying thought because it means we are actively living through the dismantling of the old world order, and it is happening in slow motion through bureaucratic agreements, energy deals, and shifting alliances. But if that is the geopolitical reality on the ground, what is the second indicator? You mentioned there were 5 distinct prophecies for this era.
The second prophecy is where her writings take a sudden and profound departure from traditional political analysis. She asserted that the subsequent sign humanity would encounter would bear no political dimension whatsoever. In fact, it would force us to look away from our terrestrial borders entirely. She focused her writings on the sky. You are referring to unexplained aerial phenomena. For decades, that subject was the absolute fringe. It was dismissed as science fiction or mass hysteria. But recently, there has been a massive paradigm shift in how we talk about this. There has been a complete reversal, and Dixon foretold exactly this period. She stated that humanity would gradually transition from dismissive mockery to intrigued curiosity, and ultimately to an open acknowledgement that an inexplicable reality exists beyond our current comprehension. She wrote that unexplained aerial phenomena would become impossible to disregard. These would not be mere rumors or isolated sightings by unreliable witnesses, but recurring events tracked and witnessed by highly credible observers.
Which is exactly what we are seeing right now. We have military aviators, highly sophisticated surveillance apparatuses, and governmental bodies themselves officially conceding encounters with unidentified objects. We have watched congressional hearings where intelligence officials are discussing non-human craft under oath. The conversation has completely shifted from outright denial and ridicule to active, urgent investigation. The official terminology changed from UFO to UAP to remove the stigma, so scientists and the military could actually study it.
And Dixon maintained that such observations would precipitate a profound psychological turning point. She explicitly stated that the outcome would not be physical devastation, like an invasion from a science fiction film, but rather a philosophical shock. Humanity, she believed, would be compelled to completely reevaluate its position within the cosmos. Imagine the absolute repercussions of that realization hitting the global consciousness. Suddenly, terrestrial political matters appear incredibly trivial. Existing ideological structures might wane or collapse entirely. Scientific paradigms would require massive expansion. Religion, philosophical thought, and cultural norms would all be forced to adapt in very distinct, likely painful ways.
The psychological impact of realizing we are not the apex intelligence in the universe is staggering. It is an existential shock. But how did she say we would react to this revelation? Because human beings don't have a great track record of handling paradigm-shifting news with grace.
You are entirely correct, and she cautioned that humanity's response would not be uniform. According to her interpretation, the true significance was never the phenomenon itself, but the collective human reaction to it. She predicted severe polarization. Some individuals would experience profound wonder and a unifying curiosity, while others would be gripped by absolute fear and aggressive denial. She believed this polarization in our psychological reaction would be far more consequential than whatever is actually traversing our atmosphere. In her view, the ultimate test was one of psychological maturity for our species.
If something inexplicable definitively revealed itself tomorrow, a large portion of the population would immediately perceive it as a threat that needs to be destroyed, simply out of fear of the unknown. And that fear, that reactionary panic, transitions perfectly into the next prophecy you mentioned. Because if we are psychologically fragile looking at the sky, we are already fracturing here on the ground.
We are. And this brings us to the third prophecy, which is frequently referred to as the divided nation. After discussing the philosophical shock from the sky, Dixon directed her attention squarely back to human society. This is where her writings become incredibly acute and deeply psychological. She issued a dire warning that the most influential nations globally would not primarily succumb to external attack, but rather to internal fragmentation.
Not an invasion, not foreign bombs, but a collapse from within. A gradual erosion of trust between neighbors.
Exactly. She depicted an era where people would no longer merely disagree about tax policy or economic principles, but about the fundamental nature of reality itself. Distinct groups within the same borders would rely on entirely disparate information sources, embrace completely different interpretations of basic historical events, and begin to view one another not as political opponents, but as genuine existential threats. According to those who interpret her predictions, the true peril for a superpower was never conflict between sovereign states, but internal strife within them.
You just perfectly described the contemporary United States. We are living inside that prophecy right now. Public discourse has grown incredibly polarized. Political affiliation has entirely merged with individual identity. We have social media algorithms amplifying outrage with far greater speed than reason or nuance. News is filtered exclusively through personal loyalties rather than empirical evidence. We see friends disconnecting, families deliberately avoiding certain subjects because the emotional intensity has significantly surpassed the level of normal disagreement. We literally occupy different realities.
And Dixon proposed that fear would assume the pivotal role in this division. When societies feel apprehensive about their future, whether due to economic instability, geopolitical tension, or rapid technological change, they seek immediate explanations. And those explanations often simplify into assigning blame. Once individuals begin to define themselves primarily through opposition to another group, compromise is perceived as outright betrayal, and cooperation is viewed as a sign of weakness.
And when compromise becomes a sin, the democratic mechanism breaks down. You cannot legislate or govern a country where half the population views the other half as an enemy combatant.
That is the hidden cost she warned about. Each instance where suspicion supplants trust, the societal bedrock weakens incrementally. It is imperceptible at first, but it is deeply cumulative. She did not describe a civil war in the traditional sense of armies marching across fields. She depicted something quieter, yet profoundly unsettling, a psychological fragmentation. Individuals residing in the same country, experiencing entirely disparate truths, elevating different heroes, and fighting different adversaries. When such a state arises, the actual institutions of the nation struggle to function effectively because their operation relies entirely on a collective belief system.
Right. Laws are only effective because people accept their legitimacy. The economy only functions because people trust the currency. Democracies only operate because people agree upon the foundational rules, even when their preferred candidate loses. If you remove trust, the system doesn't instantly explode. It just rots. It slowly erodes until it cannot support its own weight.
She believed that a significant event would eventually expose just how tenuous this unity had become. Not necessarily an election, but a specific domestic crisis that would compel people to explicitly choose between cooperation and confrontation. The outcome of that choice, she suggested, would determine whether a nation could heal or whether its divisions would become permanent fractures. And those internal divisions directly impact the global power balance, which leads directly into the fourth prophecy, known as the Southern Triangle.
How does our domestic fragmentation translate into this Southern Triangle?
She depicted a growing tension not only between the major global powers we discussed earlier, but also within their strategically significant spheres of influence. According to interpretations of her symbolism, the lion represents the dominant northern power, the bear the eastern rival, and the eagle in this specific context represents a significant southern neighbor or hemisphere. She asserted that these entities would become deeply interconnected through economic, political, and security pressures.
So we are moving away from direct confrontation and looking at indirect competition.
Exactly. She suggested that competition between great powers would increasingly manifest indirectly through alliances, trade relationships, and the exertion of influence over adjacent southern regions, rather than through direct military conflict. Instead of conquering physical territory with tanks, nations would contend for collaborative partnerships and infrastructure control.
This is modern geopolitical maneuvering. We see this with massive global infrastructure initiatives. One superpower builds a port in a developing southern nation. Another secures an exclusive energy deal. Another signs a telecommunications and technology agreement. It is subtle expansion. Small actions that progressively completely reconfigure the global power structure without a single shot being fired.
Dixon believed that pressure applied too forcefully by one superpower could push smaller nations directly toward another, not out of ideological alignment, but out of sheer economic survival and necessity. Nations respond to how they are treated. Respect encourages partnership. Undue pressure, sanctions, or neglect invites alternative arrangements. Her warning was about the absolute peril of miscalculation. If a powerful, distracted northern nation presumes loyalty from its southern neighbors is a given, it will completely fail to notice the subtle shifts occurring in those relationships.
And by the time Washington recognizes the change, the influence will have already vanished. We are seeing countries in South America and Africa rapidly diversifying their partnerships, stepping away from the traditional Western financial systems and engaging heavily with Eastern powers. She predicted a diplomatic watershed moment, right? A negotiation that seems minor at first, but changes everything.
She did. An accord that would initially appear administrative or pragmatic, but years later would be recognized as historically significant, because history frequently operates in exactly this manner. Trade routes and strategic partnerships often prove vastly more consequential than battles. The decline of an empire's influence rarely appears dramatic as it unfolds. It presents as paperwork, diplomatic meetings, and signatures. And that brings us to the fifth and most defining prophecy regarding global power, known as the patient rival.
The patient rival. This goes back to the bear we discussed earlier. The idea that global influence transitions not through a singular, apocalyptic war, but through strategic patience and watching your opponent exhaust themselves.
Jeane Dixon posited that the equilibrium of global influence would shift because one power gradually weakened itself from the inside out. She described a rival nation that would not need to directly defeat its competitor on a battlefield. Instead, it would merely bide its time, observe, and carefully expand its sphere of economic and diplomatic influence, while the other side grappled with exactly what we just discussed: internal dissension, economic strains, political distractions, and societal fragmentation.
It is a disquieting thought because it is so incredibly plausible. Great powers rarely collapse solely due to a foreign army invading their capital. They exhaust themselves. Their resources become stretched thin across too many global conflicts. Their domestic attention is fragmented by culture wars, priorities clash, and the sustained, unified focus required to maintain global leadership simply evaporates.
While one nation engages in endless internal debate and political theater, another meticulously prepares. While one constantly reacts to short-term news cycles, another strategically plans for the next century. Dixon believed that the defining conflict of this specific era would be psychological rather than military. Perception, trustworthiness, and economic confidence would determine power more significantly than sheer military might. If your historic allies begin to question your domestic stability and your reliability, your influence diminishes even if you possess a massive military.
And if your competitors project steadfastness, long-term vision, and patience, their position strengthens without ever having to fire a weapon. She warned that a specific decision would eventually be made, a compromise or a strategic repositioning that would look entirely reasonable and practical at the moment. But historians would later identify it as the exact turning point where global leadership quietly transitioned.
Because empires rarely recognize the precise moment they reach their zenith. At the time, daily life persists. Debates continue on television, the stock markets operate, people commute to their jobs, and everything feels entirely normal. It is only with the benefit of historical distance that the decline becomes obvious. She predicted that many individuals would initially fiercely deny this change because psychologically, it is devastating to accept that the era of supremacy you were born into has concluded.
But she didn't present this transition as the end of the world, did she? She suggested that power transitions are the natural, cyclical occurrences of human history. The danger isn't the change itself. The danger is the stubborn refusal to acknowledge the change as it is happening. Denial causes chaos, while acceptance allows a society to adapt and survive.
Exactly, and that leads to her most crucial, encompassing message. After detailing the shifting power dynamics, the societal division, and the inexplicable phenomena in the sky, she left what she termed the choice. All of these indicators, the rapid technological growth, the fragmentation, the geopolitical tension, were destined to coalesce simultaneously, prompting humanity as a whole to engage in profound introspection.
So the climax of all these prophecies isn't a singular catastrophic event. It is a collective moral and psychological decision.
As per her literary works, the genuine pivotal moment wouldn't be forged in legislative bodies or high-level military conferences. It would be forged through the routine, daily choices made by everyday individuals. She cautioned that our current technological strides, if entirely uncoupled from moral development, risked fostering a dangerously emotionally detached society, an existence that is highly effective, yet completely devoid of empathy.
We are staring down the barrel of that right now with artificial intelligence and algorithmic social conditioning. Data transmits instantaneously. We are constantly surveilled. Human worth is increasingly reduced to digital output, metrics, and engagement statistics. We are being quantified rather than recognized as unique, complex beings.
However, she also articulated an alternative future. The very technology capable of isolation could also be utilized to forge unprecedented global connections. The identical knowledge causing division could also enlighten populations. The apprehension-inducing awareness of our fragile place in the cosmos could, conversely, spark deep inquisitiveness and unprecedented collaboration. Her conviction was that humankind would confront a mental and moral dilemma. One trajectory sees fear as the absolute dominant force, with groups retreating into distrust, communication faltering, and animosity becoming the normalized standard.
And the other path?
The other path involves an expanding consciousness, a reality where individuals learn to actively challenge manipulation, oppose the erosion of their own humanity, and consciously opt for understanding even amid profound, differing viewpoints. She was very clear that her prophecies were advisories, not guarantees. They indicated a potential trajectory based on current momentum, not an inescapable fatalistic conclusion.
The objective is readiness, not alarm. She was talking about an awakening of individual agency, heightened consciousness, careful observation, and an understanding of how easily fear propagates. She maintained that massive societal shifts always originate at the personal tier.
Because communities, and ultimately nations, are constructed from countless recurring individual selections. Each dialogue you engage in, every response you elect to make, Every instance you opt to hear someone out rather than confront them, these minor, seemingly insignificant deeds collectively influence the massive societal norms. Significant historical currents frequently stem from an accumulation of modest, daily, individual choices.
That is a profound responsibility. It means the common individual genuinely sways the trajectory of history. The impending years are going to be characterized by profound intensity. We have accelerated technological progress, a complete restructuring of the global political landscape, furious cultural discussions, and deep inquiries into our place in the universe, all happening at the exact same time. The strain is going to be immense.
The strain stems from the synchronized occurrence of all these changes, and while some will inevitably react with apprehension and violence, others will approach it with a grounded inquisitiveness. The ultimate result of this era hinges entirely on which psychological response gains prevalence. Her final pronouncement served less as a mystical prophecy and more as a direct invitation to engage. She held that people intermittently encounter junctures where ambiguity becomes inescapable. Established tenets cease to function. Data inundates us so rapidly we cannot distinguish veracity from deceit.
And in those periods, we either gain collective wisdom or we succumb to heightened apprehension. The peril resides not in a lack of knowledge, but in an excess of it without the wisdom to process it. Overwhelmed individuals seek straightforward solutions, which usually means identifying an easy adversary to blame.
Yet she maintained that the future was not destined. She outlined this choice as a continuous individualistic determination made repeatedly every single day. Each person determines whether to confront the ambiguity of this decade with wrath or inquisitiveness, animosity or forbearance, dread or understanding. If a sufficient number of individuals opt for understanding, they incrementally influence the collective future. In her perspective, the gravest hazard was the erosion of human dignity, the point at which people cease perceiving others as distinct individuals and begin categorizing them as enemies.
Once we do that, severe actions become incredibly simple to rationalize. Empathy vanishes. Meaningful discourse becomes unfeasible. We have seen what happens in history when that outlook takes hold. But she also offered a measured sense of hope. The very conduits that propagate misinformation are also capable of fostering profound global comprehension.
She foresaw an epoch of enlightenment. Not a magical moment of insight, but a steadily increasing acknowledgement that humankind inhabits a shared, fragile world and faces a common destiny, irrespective of national boundaries. Ecological imperatives, the ethical dimensions of artificial intelligence, and worldwide communication will progressively compel collaboration. Not driven by utopian ideals, but by sheer pragmatic exigency. Survival will mandate cooperation.
If the sky remains an unknown, it guides us toward modesty. If international friction endures, it propels us toward necessary dialogue. The pressures of this decade are the exact mechanisms required to stimulate human growth and wisdom.
But that consciousness requires deliberate selection. It cannot be imposed by governmental figures or established systems. Every individual listening to this is responsible for choosing critical thought, maintaining composure, and resisting manipulation. The future rests entirely on individual discernment. The global landscape has perpetually navigated phases of deep ambiguity, yet insight has consistently represented humanity's preeminent asset. The transition is here. The choice is yours.